I gave birth alone on a military base while deployed. Not alone in the way that people sometimes say alone when they mean without the people they most wanted there, though that was also true. Alone in the literal sense. No husband, no mother, no sister, no friend who had known me long enough to hold my hand through something this large. A military doctor I had met twice, a nurse whose name I learned that morning and whose kindness I will not forget for the rest of my life, and then, at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in October, my daughter. Her name is Eva. She was 6 pounds 11 ounces, and she had, from the first moment, a quality of absolute presence, the sense of someone who has arrived and intends to stay. I held her in the delivery room of a military hospital in a country I cannot name, in a time zone 8 hours from home, and I looked at her face, and I thought, "You are the most important thing I have ever done." I called my husband, Daniel, an hour after she was born. He answered on the fourth ring. I said, "She's here. Eva is here. She's perfect." He said, "Okay." Not congratulations, not I wish I was there, not tell me everything. Okay. I told myself it was the time difference, that he had been asleep, that the emotion would come when he was awake and had processed it. I told myself these things because I needed to believe them, and because I was holding my daughter in a hospital room 8 hours from home, and I did not have the capacity, in that moment, to hold anything else. I did not find out the truth for 3 weeks. I need to tell you about the deployment because context matters, and because the circumstances of Eva's birth are not separate from what happened after. I had been deployed for 5 months when I discovered I was pregnant. This was not planned. I will not pretend it was planned because honesty is more useful than the version that makes the timeline more comfortable. What I will tell you is that when I discovered it, I was certain about 2 things: that the baby was Daniel's and that I was going to be a mother. Military pregnancy during deployment is not simple. There are protocols, timelines, medical evaluations, decisions about continuation of service that are made with clinical efficiency by the institution and with considerably less efficiency by the human being at the center of them. I remained deployed until the final month, at which point I was transferred to the nearest military medical facility, which was not in the country I had been deployed to, and was not in the country where Daniel and I lived, and was, by any reasonable measure, very far from home. Daniel had not come. I had not expected him to come. The distance and the cost and the circumstances made it genuinely difficult, but I had, in the honest part of myself, hoped. He had said he would try. The trying had not produced a result, and the trying had stopped being mentioned in our communications in the weeks before Eva's birth. I gave birth with the nurse whose name I learned that morning, and the doctor I had met twice, and I held my daughter in the delivery room, and I called home. He said, "Okay." The truth came through my sister. Her name is Rachel, and she has been for 35 years the person I call when I need to know something real. She called me 3 weeks after Eva's birth on a Sunday morning that was a Sunday evening where I was, and she said in the careful voice she uses when she is about to say something difficult, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to be sitting down." I was already sitting. I was feeding Eva in the small room I had been given on the base, in the specific consuming focus of early motherhood, which had been, in those 3 weeks, the thing I had organized myself around, because the alternative, the distance, the aloneness, the okay on the phone, was too much to hold alongside everything else. Rachel said, "Daniel has been telling his family that the baby isn't his." I sat very still. She said, "His mother called Aunt Karen. She said Daniel told them, I don't know exactly when, sometime in the last few weeks, that he had reason to believe the baby wasn't his, that you had been deployed, and that things between you had been difficult, and that he didn't know." I said, "He knows." Rachel said, "I know he knows. That's why I'm calling." I said, "He was at home. I was here. There is no question about what happened and when." Rachel said, "I know, Claire. That's why I'm calling." I looked at Eva. She was looking back at me with the absolute, uncomplicated attention of a 3-week-old who has not yet learned that the world contains anything complicated. I said, "How many people has he told?" Rachel said, "From what Aunt Karen said, most of his family. His mother, his brother, his aunts, maybe more." I sat with that for a moment, with the specific weight of a story being told about me and my daughter in rooms I was not in, to people I could not respond to, while I was 8 hours away on a military base holding a baby that was without question my husband's child. I said, "I need you to do something for me." Rachel said, "Anything." I said, "I need you to find out exactly who he's told and exactly what he said. I need to know the full picture before I do anything." She said, "I'll find out." I said, "Rachel, don't tell him you called me." She said, "Of course not." I had 6 weeks remaining on the base before I was scheduled to return home with Eva. 6 weeks in which Daniel continued to communicate with me in the specific, careful way of someone who is managing a situation. Present enough not to raise alarm, distant enough to maintain whatever he was building. I responded in kind. I told him about Eva, her weight, her expressions, the way she had started tracking movement with her eyes. I sent photographs. I was, in my communications with him, a new mother sharing her daughter with her husband. I gave nothing away. I was building a file. Rachel had done what I asked. By the end of the first week, she had a complete picture. Daniel had told his mother, his brother Michael, his Aunt Patricia, and 3 cousins that he had serious doubts about Eva's paternity. He had told them that our relationship had been difficult, that I had been deployed, that he had reason to wonder. He had not made a formal accusation. He had planted a doubt, carefully, in the specific way of someone who wants the story to be established before the person it's about can respond to it. His family had believed him, or had chosen to act as though they believed him, which is functionally the same thing in a family that closes around its own. I documented everything Rachel told me: dates, names, what had been said, and to whom. I kept it in the file I had started the morning after Rachel's call. I also called my attorney. Not Webb this time, Diana, my family law attorney, who had become familiar with the landscape of my marriage over the preceding months in ways I had not anticipated when I first retained her. I told her what Rachel had told me. I told her calmly, in order. She said, "When you return, request a DNA test immediately, not because you need to prove anything to yourself. You and I both know what the result will be, but because the test creates a legal record that cannot be disputed and that addresses what he said in a way that no amount of conversation can match." I said, "I know." She said, "Document everything he said, who he told, when, what exactly. Rachel's account in writing, with dates." I said, "Already done." She said, "Come and see me the week you're back." I said, "I'll call you from the airport." I returned home on a Thursday morning with Eva in a carrier against my chest and a carry-on bag, and the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had given birth alone on a military base and spent 6 weeks processing what her husband had done while simultaneously being a new mother. Daniel met me at the airport. He held Eva for the first time in the arrivals hall, in front of the people moving around us with their luggage and their ordinary Thursday morning lives, and I watched his face when he held her. I want to be honest about what I saw. I saw something real, a man holding his daughter for the first time, whatever else was happening, and feeling something genuine about it. That was real. I am not going to say it was not real. But I was also watching the face of a man who had told his family that the child he was holding might not be his, who had built a story carefully over weeks in rooms I was not in, who had said okay when I called to tell him she was born. I said, "We need to talk." He said, "I know." We drove home. Eva slept in her car seat. The city moved past the windows in the ordinary way of a Thursday morning. At home, with Eva in the bassinet we had set up before the deployment, which he had set up, which told me something about what he had actually believed during those months, whatever he had been saying, I sat at the kitchen table. I said, "Tell me what you told your family." He said, "Claire." I said, "Tell me exactly what you told them." He told me. The version he gave was the version of someone who had been managing a story and now had to account for it. Careful, minimizing, emphasizing the doubt rather than the accusation, framing it as concern rather than claim. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I'm going to ask you to come with me to a medical appointment on Monday, a DNA test for Eva." He said, "That's not necessary." I said, "I know it's not necessary. I know the result will be. So do you. But you told your family something, and that something is going to be answered with a document, not a conversation." He was quiet. I said, "Monday, 9 o'clock. Deanna's office has arranged it." He came on Monday. The result came back in 8 days. 99.998% probability of paternity. Ava was his daughter. She had always been his daughter. She was his daughter in the delivery room at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning when I called home and he said, "Okay." She was his daughter through every week of the 6 weeks on the base. She was his daughter in the arrivals hall when he held her for the first time. She had always been his daughter. Diana sent the result to his attorney with a letter I will not quote in full because it was precise and thorough and said everything that needed to be said in the language that legal letters use when they are saying things that are not going to be argued with. I sent copies to Rachel, who sent them to the family members she had been in contact with. Not with a message, just the document. The document was the message. His mother called me 2 days after she received it. She said, "Claire." I said, "Patricia, I gave birth alone on a military base at 3 in the morning. I called home and he said, okay. I spent 6 weeks on a base with my newborn daughter before I could bring her home, while your son was telling you she might not be his." She said, "I should have." I said, "Yes, you should have." I said, "Ava is your granddaughter. She has always been your granddaughter. I will not prevent a relationship between the two of you because she deserves grandparents and I am not going to punish her for what her father did. But I need you to understand what was done." Patricia said, "I understand. I hope you do." The divorce proceedings are ongoing. I will not detail them because they are active and because they involve Eva, who is 7 months old and who deserves privacy in the proceedings that will shape her life. What I will tell you is what is true right now. Eva is 7 months old and she has my eyes and her father's ears, and the specific, absolute quality of presence she had from the first moment, the sense of someone who has arrived and intends to stay. She is, without qualification, the most important thing I have ever done. I gave birth alone on a military base at 3 in the morning. I held her in a hospital room 8 hours from home and I thought, "You are the most important thing I have ever done." And then I called home and the phone rang 4 times and the man who answered said, "Okay." That okay is what it is. It cannot be changed. What I did with everything that came after it is mine. I documented. I waited. I came home. I requested the test. I sent the result. And then I called his mother and I told her that Eva was her granddaughter and had always been her granddaughter. Because Eva deserves grandparents and because I am not the kind of person who punishes a child for what an adult did. That was harder than the documentation, harder than the airport, harder than sitting at the kitchen table and telling him to come with me on Monday. That was the hardest thing, and I did it anyway, because Eva deserved it. She always deserves it. I want to say something to every woman who has carried something alone. A pregnancy, a deployment, a secret, a grief, while the person who was supposed to carry it with her was somewhere else doing something else. You did not carry it alone because you were not enough. You carried it alone because you were exactly enough, more than enough, and the person who should have been beside you was not the person you needed them to be. That is their failure, not yours. Ava was born at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning with a nurse whose name I learned that day and a doctor I had met twice. She was born into a room that did not contain her father, and she was born healthy and whole and entirely herself. She was not diminished by the absence. Neither were you. Whatever you have carried alone, carry it with the knowledge that carrying it made you exactly who you needed to be for what came next. She doesn't stay silent. She doesn't stay broken. She rises. Sometimes rising is calling home at 3 in the morning and hearing okay, and deciding in that moment that okay is not the last word. The DNA result was the last word, and it said exactly what you already knew. Subscribe, new story every week, and every single one of them ends the same way. She rises. Leave a comment. Have you ever had to carry something alone that you should not have had to carry alone? I read every single one.